And we're live.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Mockingbird Foundation 40th anniversary of Phish celebration. My name is Mike Przbilski. I will be co-hosting along with Ryan Storm with our panel, and we'll get into them shortly. I just wanted to give a quick overview of the Mockingbird Foundation before we begin. The Mockingbird Foundation broadens access and educational opportunities for young people in music and the musical arts. It was started by Phish fans in October of 1996 and has raised and granted over $2.2 million to music education programs nationwide in all 50 states. And if you can't afford to donate, we would ask that you please support Live Phish because a portion of the Live Phish profits do get donated to the foundation. And with that, we'll start intros with the panel. I'll kick it over to Ryan first, and then we can get going with the rest of the group.
Hi. I'm excited to be here. Thank you guys very much for having me. I'm Ryan. I like Phish a lot. Some people might be like, why is there a child on this Phish 40th anniversary broadcast? I really like Phish, and I'm excited to be here with these four fine gentlemen to talk about the last 40 years of my favorite band. So, David, you want to go next?
Okay, I'm David Steinberg, Zizix for random, and this is my cat Tappy for the record. And I've been seeing Phish since 1989, although like 10 days after Charlie, though, so he's before me. But I've seen more shows than he has, and I still, as of now, I've seen more shows than Scott, but I'll not be true for much longer.
Scott?
I'm Scott Marks. I do most of the setlist updates for Phish.net and am a part of Mockingbird. I am the noob out of the three of us with my first show in 1997. And I have no fancy things like Charlie because I am in a hotel in Keene, New Hampshire.
And why are you in a hotel in Keene, New Hampshire?
I'm seeing Pink Talking Phish with the Giant Country Horns tonight at the Colonial Theater, where Phish played with the horns in 1991.
That's awesome. And Scott, my name is Charlie Dirksen, as some of you know. Scott was being very modest. He does nearly all of the setlist updates on Phish.net.
If you hear, tell him,
David.
I can't do anything. It's only him.
And I have been, I guess, with the Mockingbird Foundation since its founding in October 1996. I served as the Associate General Counsel and Vice President for Mockingbird for a long time, and now I'm an Executive Advisor, which means that I simply answer questions that the current Executive Board of the Mockingbird Foundation has, if they have any, primarily about legacy foundation issues. And I'm an antitrust lawyer in my day-to-day work. And I am a year older than Ryan's dad, which I just learned.
There you go.
If I can't see your eyes, is any of this true?
I do like the.
No.
I wasn't sure at first. If the hat and glasses were like a filter on your computer or if they were real.
If it's really bothering you, I could take them off.
No, it's great. We just don't know.
Fitting.
As Scott said, we don't know if you're telling the truth, about what you're about to say about Phish because we can't, see
That's
your eyes,
right.
but that's okay. Shall we jump in?
Should be.
Shall we jump in? Turn back the clock 40 years to the day, or maybe not.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So I guess Charlie and I were speaking yesterday, and we've had email communications on when the first Phish show was, because there are show notes on Phish.com saying 12/2/83, as well as 10/23/84. So there's been some conflicting reports on that. I don't know if everyone would like to share their thoughts on that. I know Zizix, you're going to give a deeper dive on the early days, so if you'd want to kick off.
Well, that was a little bit before my time, in 1983, but I buy into the 12/2/83 as the first Phish show theory, regardless of whether or not they use that name. Just because the four of them played. Well, the other four of them played.
Yeah,
because
there were 4 musicians.
there are 4 musicians, 3 of which are still in the band, who played on stage, which their name may or may not have been Phish. We will probably never know, barring a time machine, but I feel that was the first show.
Yeah, I think it's the first show, even if it didn't have the band's name for a while. It was apparently said that the first 2 shows in 1983 were the Blackwood Convention, and then in 2019 on Phish Radio, Trey and Phish pretty much said there was no Blackwood Convention. So while those first 2 shows happened in 1983, we don't know the name of the band. I guess the first show with Phish as the name Phish was 10/23/84, but I think it's generally assumed that those first 2 shows are part of Phish canon.
Yeah, Phish was never fucking called Blackwood Convention. I think.
Can we trust
And
anything that they say, though?
No, we can't. That's the
Like-
thing. And also, if you go back and watch it, it's hilarious because Fishman, jokingly says, yeah, we would never have a terrible name like Blackwood Convention or something like that. And of course, Phish with a PH was considered a terrible, ridiculous, absurd, stupid name, 40 years ago. And
Has that changed?
not to a lot of people, no doubt, but one theory is that because Phish is Phish with an F, people would want to know where Phish was playing, back in 83, 84, and it just sort of naturally became PH, Phish with a PH, the band name, so somewhat organically, but that Grant Street Garage gig, I think, was probably the first show as Phish, which is why Phish.com still says that, even though Phish.com also says that 12/2/83 was the first Phish show. So, that's my 2 cents on that. I mean, memories obviously are, being what they are. I don't think
I just had
anyone really recalls.
that I want to float here, seeing how it is Trey and John who said it was not called Blackwood Convention, and Mike is usually the odd man out whenever there's a fight in the band, and it's a bridge term, which the game that is,
Right.
which feels
It's
like a very
hilarious.
Mike thing. Maybe Mike called the band Blackwood Convention, and the other 2 called it Phish.
It's
Interesting.
and that's entirely plausible. I mean, I feel like that's just as plausible. But when Trey asked in that December 2019 interview, where did that come from? He says, like, we were never fucking called Blackwood Convention. But the fact is that a long time ago, Kevin Shapiro, the band's archivist, who's, by the way, like a fantastic guy and has been a supporter of Mockingbird from the beginning, he interviewed Trey, Mike, Phish, and Jeff, I think, as well, when he found that when this 12/2/83 partial recording came up, and he asked them about the details of it and so on, and that show was on the same day that Michael Jackson's Thriller debuted on MTV, December 2nd, 1983, and so that's why they were able to determine that was definitely the first gig. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know where I'm going with this necessarily. It's just because no one recalls for sure. But that's what they told Kevin, is that no one really recalls for sure. But we think we were billed as Blackwood Convention. That's where that came from. We didn't pull it out of our ass. You know what I mean? It was something that we got from Kevin Shapiro, who got it from purportedly reliable sources. Meaning like Trey, Mike, Phish, and or Jeff. And so I really think that if you go back and look at that December 19 interview with Ari Fink of Sirius Radio that Trey and Phish had, I mean, you can't. Trey's got a gleam in his eye. We were never fucking called Blackwood Convention.
I also recall that for the longest time, Phish thought their first show was on October 30th.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was only due
15
to the
years.
Phish Companion and all the work we were doing. We managed to discover that it was in fact December 2nd, which is why
Well, I
on
think
10/30/98 they did Long Cool Woman in the Black Dress as
Right.
an honor 15th anniversary of their first show.
Well, and Trey literally said, we've been told this is a 15-year anniversary, so they don't even know.
Yeah, we've been told. If there's one thing I've learned being in the jam band scene, if your information about show stats is coming from a website with .com. It's probably incorrect. You need a .net.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you, but but that being said,
That's what I've learned.
yeah.
I
Should
should like
we?
to point out that Ryan Storm's opinions are not necessarily those of the Mockingbird Foundation.
No,
That's right.
they're not.
Anyone?
I said that was my personal opinion.
My opinions are also not necessarily those of the Mockingbird Foundation or Fishnet.
Trey also said that the cheer after the 10:30:98 Long Cool Woman was a lot better than the response they got the first time they played it. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's true.
Makes sense.
Nobody shut the band sound off.
So, David, do you want to take us, from the first show, talk a little bit about the early days after that?
Well, I started in '89, like I said earlier, a few days after Charlie did, and it was definitely a much, much different world back then. Like my first show was at the Chance in Poughkeepsie, which was like a 300-seat venue that was maybe a third full. And to the point where a bunch of students came down from the same school as mine up the road. And I finished I got through the elimination round of the Halloween costume that contest they were having that day in no costume, just because people knew who I was from my school. That's how few people were there. The person who won was wearing this very amazing, I think it was either Nixon or Reagan costume with a great mask, and they deserved the win.
When did you first have the cape?
The cape, that's much later. Old Mockingbird board member Jack Leibowitz, his wife made us all capes for Halloween '98, lizard capes. We were all going as lizards. And then a few years later for Cypress, or a year later, I decided I was going to go as Starman, which had wings, not a cape. But then the next year it became with a cape, because I decided I needed to be a superhero. And then every time I try to retire it, someone makes me a new cape and says, no, you can't. Warning to anyone, if you ever do something like this, you're doing it for life. You will never be allowed to retire anything. But I mean, that is the main thing I would say, though, is that like the band would chill before and after shows and during set breaks. I remember in '92, they did the Horde tour, and then they did 3 solo shows along I-64 in Virginia. And then they did the Santana openings. And they pull up to tracks in a tour bus for the first time. Before then, they would, Paige once drove into the Capitol Theater in like a 70s bustle car, like 20 minutes before sound check time, like in the same lot that we all were parking in. Mm-hmm. But they put it in this tour bus, and we all, like the 8 of us who were on tour, looked at them, what? And Drake actually came out and apologized to us, saying, look, our tour is now going to be much more easy for us to do long distances. It's probably going to be a little bit harder for you guys. And we're sorry about that. But yeah, we have this tour bus and we're stoked.
Love that.
So it was very much audience centric. They very much, like, once you start going to a few shows, they would know who you were. They didn't necessarily like you, but they would know who you were. And sorry, Alice. Sorry, look at the comments there.
We just received a text from a certain lyricist for Phish who said, buy Mike a chair.
But even the one big difference, I'd say, there was a much less jamming per se. I mean, it happened, mm-hmm. But it was much more about energy and the songs and the compositions. And around 93, 94 is when the jamming became much more of a focus. So that's one big difference between the earlier days. Like they spent 4 years between like 88 and 92, 93. They spent that time figuring out how to play to an audience. And once they figured that out, then they decided to open it up some more. So sweet. Don't know if that was informative or not, but hopefully it was.
Cool perspective. Anyone else have anything to add on, stuff from the 80s? Early 90s, stuff like that?
Just a little. I was on mute. Sorry. That must have looked really funny. Anyway, so I started talking, and I'm like, wait, no one can fucking hear me. Anyway, I don't know if there's a parental advisory notice up anywhere, because I have a tendency to have a potty mouth. But in the early 1990s in particular, and you can just look at Phish set list to see this, but Phish was actually repeating quite a bit, and part of the reason they were doing that was because they were, honing their craft and learning how to just expertly, play their songs really freaking well. And David, you saw a lot of shows at that point. I didn't, and I was primarily seeing Grateful Dead shows and collecting Grateful Dead tapes. But I started collecting Phish tapes in those early years primarily because they were playing so well as a band and playing their songs so well that people were like, "Hey, you gotta hear this. You gotta check these guys out." And of course, when Phish Companion setlist compiling began in earnest in the late '90s, I listened to a ton, basically everything that circulated from the early '90s with Dan Purcell and some other folks, and. I hate to say this, but it's like it can turn you into a jaded vet real quick listening to all those 1990, 91 shows, because there are stunning similarities show to show. I mean, there really are.
There's a feature in Phish Stats that most people don't ever look at called songs played in consecutive shows.
Right.
To have an entry in there, you have to have seen that show in 5 straight shows. And so really after 94, if your first show was after 94, you have no entries in there. But I just looked up mine really quickly, and I saw bouncing around the room every single show between 5 where is it? Between 5/6 1990 and 5/2 91, which is 14 shows, and every night they played bouncing.
Wow.
So
yeah.
What's the minimum? It has to be 5 shows to show up in there?
In a row.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know
That's rough.
It was reprised in 2010 in back-to-back shows.
Yeah, I'm thinking about maybe changing that. So it, as you get closer and closer to the modern era, it triggers that with a smaller number. But actually, what's harsh was I saw Big Ball Jam at every single show from 12/29/92 to 3/14/93. 9 straight
Well, that's
shows.
fun.
9 straight shows was not fun. We used to. They did it like 6 in a row. That Spring Tour '93, where they're going, which coincided with spring break. I was in New Mexico, and coincided with spring break. They were playing Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. So I just did that run. And we were talking about getting giant thumbtacks to try to pop the big balls, or so okay with the idea of Big Ball Jam flambe, where they rub them in alcohol and set them on fire before throwing them out. It was a very
would
fun
go over well.
But 9 in a row, it definitely became okay, we get it. So yes, this point reiterate Charles said, yes, they did repeat a lot more back then than they do now.
Smaller catalog.
Yeah, that's
gonna
true,
happen.
obviously.
So one thing, we talking a little bit about the early 90s. Very important, I think, to highlight Amy's Farm here, because that was a big deal for the band. Were you both there, Charlie, David, or one of you, or neither?
I was there.
David was very much there, and I had the opportunity to go when I heard about it in July '91, because my roommate at the time, Jeff, lived in Maine, and so a bunch of his friends were going, and he was like, "We should go. We should go to this free Phish show." And it's at Amy's Farm. And again, at the time, I was collecting Phish tapes, but I wasn't really a big fan. I was more of a Deadhead, and I like, no joke, I literally said something to Jeff like, "There's fucking black flies everywhere in your goddamn state. I'm not going up to Maine in August to see Phish."
Jaded all the way back in 1991, folks.
That was I actually
vet.
remember it very well, because I thought the whole thing was absurd. Like I would drive up to someone's farm to see Phish when their black flies were biting. So no, I did not go to Amy's Farm. And do I regret it? Of course I do, because it would have been a blast. But who knows? You never know in life what what happens. I mean, I could have gone to Amy's farm and been like, this sucks, and never listened to Phish again. You know, you never know. Your mental state can really affect your, interpretation and your fun. So who knows? But no. David, tell us about Amy's farm.
Yeah. I saw 2 shows in the Giant Country Horns tour. And the second one at Trax, where they actually need a favor. They need to get some things photocopied. I believe it was Brad then was the manager, asked me to drive him to a photocopy place. In exchange, he put me on the list. And I drove him, and he discovered it was like a half a block away, and he got really mad that he already agreed to put me in the best. He thought it was like 5 miles away, and he got really mad about that. So, but when I was in there early, I got to see the sound. The one time I got to see a sound check, they let me in for that, which was very cool. But after that, Trey said, "Hey, we're doing this Amy's Farm thing. You really should go. It's for fans like you." So I'm like, "Okay, personal invite.
That's
okay,
great.
fine, I'll go."
Fans like
That's awesome.
And
For huge
yeah,
nerds.
PBS
The
type thing.
timer.
This show is brought to fans like you.
Did you wear the cape at Amy's farm?
No, the
Despite
cape
the humidity and the heat?
The cape was way later than that. I actually had
Okay,
some
right.
Grateful Dead.
1998, Charlie.
Sorry. I should
So,
be paying more attention.
There actually is there's a Instagram community called Phish Photos or something like that for actual not digital photos of the band.
Phish on film.
Yeah, Phish on film. Thank you. And someone had a photo of Amy's farm and pointed out that you can see me lying on the ground waiting for the doors to open. I was actually first in line to get into Amy's farm. They did not have a lottery system back then. And I was still allowed against the rail. And then
How long did you have to wait there before you got in?
like 30 minutes. I mean, it was like there was
Imagine that.
the ground upper area and a lower area. And the top area is where we all parked and slept for the night. And then you walk down this hill, and that's where the music area was. And they had a few food vendors along the side, each side, which was fairly new. But the one thing I remember at Amy's farm more than anything else, so they played 3 very long sets.
Mm-hmm.
And we all left, and immediately a rumor started that there was going to be a midnight secret set. And everyone was waiting for them to reopen the grounds for that midnight secret set, which did not happen. But even then, even in 1991, if you put Phish fans in a show, we will stay there. If they ever did that long gig where they're supposed to play all night, some of us would never leave. As long as they're on stage, we would go see them play. And that was even true in 91. And for the record, it wasn't free. It was $5 to park there. So to reseed her field. So
there you go.
So with that being the first unofficial festival, if you will, what would you say the attendance there was? Like 500, 1,000 people?
I was thinking it felt like 15 to 2,000 is how it felt. It definitely was that one of those moments where we looked around and said, there are a lot of us, aren't there? Another one was New Year's. New Year's 12/31/90 was a really controversial New Year's show because the ticket just said Phish, but then this band Chucklehead suddenly came on stage and played for 2 hours. And then they played for so long that when Phish went back for their encore, they turned the house lights on them because they ran out of time. So 91 was like the first real New Year's show where they played 3 sets. And there was an actual barrier between the crowd and the stage. That was another moment we looked around and said, wow, they're getting big. 91 had a lot of those. 91, 92 had these moments of, oh, this is happening now. And Amy's Farm was one of them. We looked around and said, it's not just me and my 200 friends. There's a lot of, there's quite a few of us here. Someone came all the way from California for that show, which set a record at the time.
Little did you know. Well, moving on from that, you kind of touched on 93 was the beginning of when jamming started to become a big thing, and into 94. But definitely want to hear from you guys, kind of your perceptions of maybe why that started to happen, why the improv started to become a goal for them, and how that affected, the fan base and the audience at the time. Because obviously there have been people like Charlie since the beginning of the band who were super jaded and cranky about everything. So, we know every era of Phish. You can look back on the message boards from the 90s and see people being like, I miss, 3 years ago how Phish used to be in like 1992. So I'm curious your guys' thoughts on all that.
I think August '93 was right where, if you were to put a line in the sand, in the middle of that summer tour, where they started to just go into a different direction with the jamming. And by the time summer '94 came around, you were seeing this on a much more frequent basis, and then the rest is history at that point, from fall '94 with the 20-30 minute jams at that point.
There really wasn't much jadedness then, because it was kind of a logical progression of where they were going, it felt like. It's like 92 had more jams than 91, and spring 93 had more jams than 92 did.
Mhm.
So it felt like it was a movement in this direction. Some of the more spacey fall 94 jams where that's where people started to say, I'm not so sure about this, when they did like those 45-minute tweezers. But the first time I heard people say, I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I agree with that completely. I think the Hey Hole improvisational exercises started in November 1992. I got that in my head for some reason. Trey may have mentioned that in an interview at some point. That's when they started sort of rehearsing, if you will, improvising together as a group. And I think Santana, in his description of the hose to them, had an influence on that, and that was, of course, when they opened for Santana in summer '92. But yeah, I mean, I agree completely with Scott that if you had to draw a line somewhere, August '93 is where to put it, because so much of August 1993, if you listen to every show that month, there's just some phenomenal improvisation by them. Some of it's completely bananas, but some of it clicks and sounds like melodious, composed music, and is truly mind-blowing. If anyone out there hasn't listened to it, I highly recommend listening to, no joke, every show in August '93 has something, every single one. And by '94, as David said, especially November '94 with the Bozeman and Bangor tweezers, and there's also the Bowie at
Minneapolis.
Yeah,
11/26/94.
right. Those are just three enormous jams, and I was lucky enough to be at Bangor, and there were plenty of people at that show who were like, "What the fuck is going on?" I mean, that during the tweezer, because part of the tweezer, is ridiculous. It sounds sort of absurd and carnival-like, and that definitely turned off some people, including, frankly, some people when they got the tapes. I mean, there's plenty of Phish fans out there who would rather things stay within 10 minutes. And I don't fault them for it. It's just, it's just the way some people prefer their Phish. They don't like, Mud Island tweezers, that sort of thing from summer '95. And I get it, I do, but that's not me. I mean, if they want to play tweezer for a full set, that's fine with me.
You and me both.
yeah, I got to see the Bowie from Providence in '94 on the New Year's run. That goes on for 35 minutes. And I admit I'm one of those people who they sometimes lose me, despite the rep that some people think I have. The longer jams, like the 10:31:98 Wolfmans, that lost me about minutes in. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I was sitting down for that one, and also the Lassie part of the Providence Bowie. I was like seven. I had a great seat for that, and I remember the Lassie stuff. Like what did he whispered some stuff during that, and I remember I remember thinking at the show, what the fuck is this? Like, is this a new song? I mean, this is dumb. I mean, but
I was in for that. The Providence Bowie, I was completely all in. I think I don't know what they're doing, but I'm amazed. It helped that they had this peak jam, like maybe 13 minutes into it. They did this really great peak to start it off. So I'm like, okay, I already got the dessert. Everything else here is just, let's see what else happens.
Right. And the coda was excellent too. And the intro was good. So
94
there was, right. But yeah. Anyway, moving on.
So Halloween 1994, obviously very big milestone, the beginning of the kind of theme that they would develop on all future Halloween shows, the White Album. But please, tell us a little bit about that, David and Charlie. What it was like in the scene at the time. The anticipation to the shows. What people thought they were going to do or what they weren't going to do.
So they announced this to the public at a show I happened to be in on a radio interview. I think it was either Raleigh or Richmond, summer '94. One of those two. I want to say Richmond, but I can't remember which one. But so we all knew we heard the interview in the parking lot. I'm like, oh, they're going to do this. And that show, by the way, was my 100th show, Halloween '94. And I drove up from New Mexico and my car broke down. And I took a Greyhound to Chicago and pick up a bus while my car was being worked on, and then came back and after the show and got the bus back down to the middle of Missouri where my car was, and it was fixed by then. So it was a bit of a hassle getting there. But there was definitely a lot of argument. A lot of people wanting Zeppelin, a lot of people wanting Pink Floyd.
Of course.
The Beatles were also in the mix. But unlike later ones, no one knew what to expect. There was no Phish bill. We went in blind. They handed out chocolates, though. Foil-covered chocolates that had a Phish stamp on them, so that the actual chocolate had the Phish logo on them.
Did that in '96 too.
But a few people saved, but I ate mine. It was actually pretty good.
Good to know.
And
mine melted in my pocket.
See, that's why I ate mine.
Yeah,
and
mine was melted and stuck.
Also went on to 2:30 in the morning by the way that they scheduled it.
3:20.
So, really? That's insane.
3:20 a.m. It's in my notes. I actually wrote it down. So
I
yeah, 3:20.
Timing
We
the
just
length.
got a message from our chat that the chocolates are on eBay, apparently.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
that doesn't surprise me in the slightest, and that's also
sure they suck.
kind of horrifying.
Only the cheapest chocolate for our fans.
Yeah. No, they were like, listen, 30 years from now, people are going to want to sell these on the internet. So, we got to make them last.
Yeah, Lord knows what actually would be like. Like I have a box of the mac and cheese from the summer of '94. And I joke about opening it up and seeing what exactly is inside it now. I don't know if I'd be more scared if it looks like mac and cheese or if it looks like maggots. Either way, it would be scary.
Maggots and cheese.
That's good. So, Charlie, what was your perspective leading up to that Halloween show and going into it?
I mean, just what David said. It's like there was a lot of hoopla, I guess you could say, and people were really excited. It was the first show I remember being basically an impossible ticket. I mean, David, you might think of something else, but that it was just such a difficult ticket. And there were so many people outside with fingers in the air, and
tried to crash to the roof of the building to get in.
Oh, that's right. And just it started late. Like it started 10, according to my notes. It started like at 10 something, and but no, it went till 3:20 in the morning. I was completely wiped out at the end. Oh, look at that.
Sorry, I wanted to pull this up because it's real and it's on eBay, which is fascinating to me. For $500.
That's.
If anyone out there really likes me, please do not buy that for me.
David, was the foil silver? Because I thought it was gold.
I thought it was gold too. I pictured it being
it was gold.
Maybe it
95.
turned silver in the last 30 years.
It's
also, I think because it was so long
maybe
ago,
it's
very, very faded gold.
I just the point of being gold because of Hanukkah Gelt, and so my memory may have become that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because the ones in 90, I have one from 95. I think I didn't go to the show, but somebody sent it to me when I made them tapes, and I think and that's gold foil. I took a picture of the son of a bitch like just a couple months ago for the blog, one of the blog posts I did on the Halloween shows. Anyway, I'm not going to sell that for $500, although maybe I should.
If you ever in dire need of $500, you have that.
It's. I don't think I could do that to somebody. It just seems so stupid.
What's
it's like you will regret this.
Wait
know-
till the 50th anniversary.
Right. Then you add another 0.
Right. Anyway, that's just sad. Anyway, but yeah, it was a legendary show for good reason. It was a very tough ticket, and ended at 3:20 in the morning, and just an amazing time, unforgettable. And of course, the Bangor show was the next show, and a bunch of people, including me, went up to Bangor thinking it was going to be an easy ticket. And it started raining in the lot, and I was like a couple hours early with my friends, and I just sort of casually walk up to the box office at the Bangor Arena, whatever the fuck it was, and they literally sold the last tickets to the guy in front of me, and I was like,
Oh, no.
wait, what? So I had to use Halloween tapes that I had made a copy of on the floor of a Days Inn or a Radisson or something in Glens Falls. I was like running around the parking lot while it was raining, holding these tapes saying, I'll make you a copy of the Halloween show if you sell me your extra
I'd
tickets.
pay for video of that.
And it was absurd. But I got 3 tickets for the 3 friends I was with, for them, for Face, and they went in. It took me another half an hour to get a ticket for myself, and I got it from Jeff Drudge. And the reason I remember his name so well is because I still own tapes of Halloween '94. No joke. He wrote his name down on a matchbook, and I lost it.
One thing
Bad
about
trainer.
Halloween '94 that people may not be aware of, from the expected people being in there, and almost anyone I've talked to, I don't know if Charlie will agree, but almost anyone I've talked to seemed to have a similar feeling, which is, as much as we all love Phish and we all love the Beatles, there was a general sense towards the second half of the like side 4. I do not remember there being so many songs on this side of the album. Like, between Revolution #1 and Revolution #9, there were a lot of, that's like, was it Honey Pie, or is that Wild Honey Pie, and Savoy Truffle and stuff like that, the songs that no one thinks of as being Beatles songs per se, or what they think of as being the Beatles song. And there was a general sense, and even Tom Marshall has mentioned this at one point, that it just, maybe they should have done a single album. It's kind of going on for a bit here, and maybe it's just a little too much music for one set. Because the thing about a Halloween set like that, especially the first one, is you don't want to zone out, because this is never going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to focus a lot on every note, saying who's singing this, how are they going to do the solo, and it was kind of exhausting, that second set, to some degree. And when Revolution #9 finally came on, it was almost like a sigh of relief. Like, okay, we've made it to the end.
We did it.
Yeah, Phish strip
Relief
too.
lasted that too
Finally.
long.
It's Brad Santa's birthday too.
Oh,
Yes,
on the 31st or the 1st?
the 31st.
31st.
Okay. Not tonight. Actually, is
scary.
Brad Sam's birthday.
Yes, Fishman flashing the crowd
Terrifying.
is a relief.
I was on the side. I was on side stage with a couple people from the Phish IRC channel, and for those of you who are Rec Music Phish people, one of them was Rosemary of that Rosemary, and I was in a spot where I could not see that, and that's not one of my bigger. I have some Phish regrets. That's not one of them. Not being able to see that. I am
go.
fine.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I heard it was
we
the most terrifying, horrifying thing to happen on that Halloween.
probably. Well, we could sit here and obviously be here for the next 10 hours and tell stories about Halloween '94, but we should keep moving here. Jump forward 2 months ahead to the MSG debut. Obviously, very big deal. We talked a little bit about the Providence Bowie that happened the night before, and they come to MSG. They play late night television for the first time earlier in the day, and they play a sold out Madison Square Garden. Tell us about what that was like, for the fan base and for the band.
Again, from my perspective, it definitely was a moment of just looking around. I was in the 200 level because that's the best seat I could get, and it was definitely like, oh my God, there are so many people here. This is insane. I don't remember if behind stage was sold or not. It may have been sold out, but only front of stage shows. But it was definitely sold out, and it was packed. And when they did Wilson, the entire 16 to 20,000 people chanted that. That was definitely a moment of, okay, this is something big. and something real. I remember this was a year before Jerry died. So as much as people say Phish got big because Jerry died, this happened way before that.
I don't have anything to add to that. We can move on.
All right. Excellent.
It wasn't a memorable show other than the Wilson.
I did look it up. They did not sell behind the stage. But
Oh, thank you.
sold that in front.
Wow.
Was that a .net or .com find?
That was a YouTube video of the show find.
Oh,
Nice.
Was it
It's reliable.
Can we get that added to .net, Scott?
Yeah, let me get right on that.
So we move into 1995 here. The later half of the 90s. Jamming starts to be a bigger thing. They're playing amphitheaters, they're playing arenas pretty much everywhere, and the festivals. And Scott, I feel like we haven't really heard from you very much, but this is kind of where you start to come in to the Phish scene. So let's dive into kind of 95 through the end of 1.0 here. Talk about the evolution through that period of the band. Again, more just from a fan's perspective at that time, what it was like, following Phish through those years.
I mean, I still don't come into play for a few more years. My first show was fall '97. I was a freshman in college and didn't have a car, and literally was home for Thanksgiving weekend. Was driven to the Hartford Civic Center, dropped off, and picked up 3 hours later by my mom. But I went from one show in '97 to 8 in '98 to like maybe 20 in '99, and so obviously started seeing a lot of Phish right off the bat once I was seeing shows. By as we'd said before, amphitheaters and arenas were now the norm. You weren't seeing really any more theater shows. And you wouldn't see theater shows pretty much ever again. 2009, you had the Fox Theater. So it would happen occasionally. It was the Fillmore in '98.
The Sirius show a few years ago.
Yeah, at the Met.
Right.
Yeah.
So it happens occasionally, but it's such a rare exception to the norm at this point, where you're just not seeing any of those intimate shows per se. And I think '97 was a huge launch pad for the band musically, where you could say that '96's Halloween album was very influential for the band, with Remain in Light by Talking Heads, where you kind of had that funk added to the mix in '97, which really blossomed as the summer moved into the fall, which if you look at all the live Phish shows that have been released, you have, I think, 1/3 of that fall '97 tours now live Phish 7 out of 21 shows, which is a very high percentage when you look at all of the years before 2003.
The one thing I'd say about the difference between the earlier days we're talking about and the later days is the tour seems a lot different then. Someone asked about 15, 20 minutes ago in the chat about what people are selling in the lot in the early days. And I was selling sodas and occasionally juice. And I remember one of my friends in summer '93 was selling stickers. And he was the first person I ever saw selling any Phish-related merchandise whatsoever. So it was very small. It was mainly people seeing their local shows, not a traveling circus. The first half of summer '94 I was doing, there were maybe 4 of us doing the tour. One time in spring '93, the entire touring crowd fit in my Geo Metro. So it was a much different world. But by late '90s, what you expect to see now when you think of the Phish lot, people selling stuff, legal and illegal. The food, the stickers, the shirts, that was all in full force. So that is one big difference between these eras. That
by '96, I would say, David, wouldn't you? I mean, after Jerry died, and I mean, a lot of folks went on tour in summer '96 selling.
Some people that was their
goods.
income.
Right. So, I mean, in July '93, that's when I bought my first lot shirts. That I'm positive about. There was a guy, I think it was one guy, maybe two, like selling a shirt, or there might have been two shirts, but I don't recall. As David said, I don't recall anyone in summer '93 selling anything in the lot at Wolf Trap, which was the only show I saw, I think, that summer. Just shirts. But David, you were selling sodas at Wolf
Yes, I
Trap?
was doing the- And just a quick aside, the reason why sodas worked back then on Dead and Fish Tour was you could buy a case of sodas for $4 and sell them in the lot for $1.
Right.
And you cannot do either of those anymore, so it doesn't work anymore. And also, tickets were $20. Gas was $1 a gallon, and it still was kind of encouraged to sleep in rest stops and stuff like that. So you could do that. You could sell a few dozen sodas after the show and make money that way.
So I know we're hitting everything at a high level for good reason, because we could talk, forever. But David, you want to just quickly summarize the festivals, like, because you were at all of them, right, in the '90s?
Starting in Amy's Farm, yes.
Right, but I mean
Clifford
right.
Ball and yeah,
Clifford Ball again.
Lemon Wheel, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
all of them.
Those moments where you look around and say, "How did this happen?" The Clifford Ball was definitely one of those moments. It was traffic getting in wasn't so bad, but definitely took me 7 hours to get out of that lot. I still have a traffic sign that I stole, like a portable one that just says "slow," because I was stopped by that sign for 45 minutes, not moving at all, and I was like, I'm going to steal that. But the whole thing, I'm just trying to find words for this. It was something that no one was expecting at all in terms of how it was set up. Like, we walk in, again, I was with old Mockingbird Foundation member Jack and Kat, and we were walking in together, and they blew like an air horn or something to let us all in. They said doors were open, and all these circus performers came out through the area, like in stilts and like juggling, and to welcome us all into the venue, which is something we were not expecting. And there were planes flying overhead with funny messages on their tail, like "a dime from here would penetrate," is the one I remember. And they had the whole ball square area with the I think the Bubble House was the first year in '97, but they had artwork and things like that. They had someone at Clifford Ball. They had someone setting up where you're supposed to take 30 seconds and leave a message to the band, and they're shooting video of that.
That's awesome.
And they're going.
No, keep going.
And that actually kind of was a theme, that they were doing this whole idea of collective work. In '97, they had us all paint these little pieces of wood, and they made a sculpture out of them and put it on the side of the stage. And then they burned it down at the end of the encore, which didn't make me happy at the time, but now I find it amusing.
The first burning
They
non-man.
gave this big speech about how this represents the feeling, how we work together, because they painted some pieces themselves right before that amazing bathtub gin.
Yeah.
And said, this is all of us together making this piece of art. And then they had this giant match catch on fire and burn the whole thing down. And they played Disco Inferno as we walked out. So,
Nice.
okay. And then the next year, we all made candles at a candle making thing. And the fourth set was played in the light of the candles. So they were doing this big thing about the idea of collaborative work, about all of us being together and being on the same page. That was a big thing I remember about that. The traffic also came to mind, although between the no, actually, I almost told a serious lie, because it was horrible getting to the Great Went. You got off at US 1, and you had 15 to 20 hours to go for the next 30 miles. So not as bad
it
as
was bad each year. When I went to it was still a train wreck getting in.
Well, that's because of the rain. But yeah, I used to. Cypress was so bad that I called a unit of measurement a Cypress, or would it take longer or less time for me to get into the venue? I went to see String Cheese in Vancouver, got into a plane in SeaTac, flew to Fort Lauderdale, and then sat in traffic for some 28 hours to get the last 50 miles. And actually, the pilot said, and if you look to your right, you'll see a 20-mile line of traffic. That's to get to this Phish festival. So I was kind of knew I was going to be in some trouble there.
Yeah.
But if a Cypress is a unit of measurement, both it and Coventry will pass the Cypress because of the weather problems.
There we go. Well, hopefully the weather's nice in Delaware next summer.
Well-
But let's talk about Cypress a little here. You've alluded to it. This is obviously, the biggest thing for Phish to date at the time. Scott, were you at Cypress? Were all three of you at Cypress? Were any of you guys not at Cypress?
Charlie?
Yeah, I saw a Dead related show in like San Francisco. So yeah, there was no way in hell you'd get me into the
A
fucking
swamp in
Everglades.
Florida.
Yeah, especially with Y2K and all that BS.
Right.
It was hilarious. It's like the
Okay,
last
Listen, though, 'cause
last place I wanted to be.
we had no idea what's going to happen because we're all sitting there in the middle of nowhere. Did the power go out? We don't know. We don't have any power here. We're all running off generators, if anything. So we had for all I knew, nukes had blown up Seattle for all I knew when I was there.
It's kind of surreal when you look at it now. Being completely detached from every at Big Cypress. I had driven from Connecticut all the way down to Florida. My grandmother lives in Palm Beach Gardens and lived there then as well. And so I stayed there a little bit afterwards. But there was no technology on site. Cell phones like I'm referring to. And now you go to a show and everyone has their phones out, and occasionally you're in a dead zone for reception, but no cell phones in '99 at Big Cypress. You had no idea what was going on. And meanwhile, they're doing New Year's Eve around the world, and there's Phish on ABC.
To give some
Cheesecake.
perspective on those lines,
I've seen like on some of the Facebook groups right now, about Sphere's shows being like this big thing for Phish, where they're now like in mainstream. But I mean, really, Big Cypress, when you're again 80,000 people and you're being broadcast around the world, that's as mainstream as you're going to get at that point.
Mm-hmm.
A quick story to show just how big that place was. I was starting to flag a little bit around 1:32 in the morning, so I went into a vendor and bought a Coca-Cola, and that was during rock and roll. That jam went on for 30 minutes. As it was winding down, I finally managed to find my friends again.
Wow.
Wow.
That's
80,000 people at Big Cypress, I believe.
Yeah, that's insane. Hard to as somebody who obviously wasn't alive at the time, it's hard to picture something like that, but just truly amazing.
Well, and now you look at the festivals where there may be 30, 40,000 at the most.
Yeah.
So half the size. It's definitely different now in 2023 than it was in '99.
100%. So post break Cypress, obviously we have kind of smaller touring year in 2000 relatively, and then hiatus for a couple of years, and then the 2.0 years. Obviously, lots of things happening behind the scenes, on stage with the band. But do you guys want to speak a little bit about that era?
I was in denial, for the record. I believed Trey was perfectly fine and sober. I was like the last person not to believe that. But musically, I mean, it was sloppy, but it also had those moments. They really just went out on a limb and said, "Hey, we're gonna improvise. Sometimes it's gonna be amazing. Sometimes we're gonna be sitting there and twiddling our thumbs until someone figures something out." But it's an error. It definitely is a moment in time where they probably will never go back to that again. And when it worked, it was amazing.
I think 2.0 gets a bad rap. with 2004 having the breakup hanging over everyone's heads, Vegas, Trey not having his voice, and Corona not being there. Fenton Williams from Dave Matthews Band was on lights. But you look at those SPAC shows, 619, 620, 2004, where they hold up with any era of Phish. And there were definitely some gems in 2003 as well. And then you look at stuff like a Greatwoods, or whatever it was called at that point, with the Birds of the Feather and the AC/DC bag, and Coventry, the Split Open and Melt after they got past the composed part. The improvisation is fantastic. So there are definitely great moments. But, for me, with the 20th anniversary of that coming up next year, it feels like a really dark point in my past. So, yeah.
I have pretty much the same thoughts as Scott. I'm sorry, David.
No, go on. I've been talking too much, and you haven't enough.
Yeah, I mean, all I have to add to what Scott just said, because I feel the same way, is that the musical highlights, I think, of 2.0 are just as, transcendent and high as Phish can ever get. Now or 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, 20 years ago, I feel like the highs from 2003, 2004 are up there with the greatest, improvisations in Phish history. That being said, I cannot be more grateful for Trey's sobriety. I mean, it's just been probably the most powerful influence on the band in the last, however long it's been now. I guess it's been like 17 years or something since he got sober. But like, I'm so grateful for that, whenever I listen to Phish, frankly.
Well, and it's not just Phish. It's, you look through the community, and, with today being the 40th anniversary, and people are commenting about how Trey served as a role model with his sobriety. And he didn't just get sober. He's kind of preached a little bit. He's has the Divide Sky Foundation, and he's, to be cliched here, but to put his money where his mouth is. He truly believes in having that second chance in life, and now with the band as well, and to be able to give back to the community in a way outside of going on stage and playing 2 sets every night is very special.
Also, if you look at the crowds, it was a fairly dark place a lot, starting around 98 through like 2004 in the crowd, where the Tucson show in fall 91, for example, I just left the lot and missed us by maybe 5 minutes. But there was a beating of a fan for allegedly selling bunk acid. There was a lot of not great stuff starting to happen around the edges, and the edges were starting to come a little bit closer to the center. And then it's not really like that now. I mean, I'm sure you can find spots where it's dark, but it's no longer seems the same quite center point that it was starting to become.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
you're going to have it happening anywhere. I think at the Gorge a couple of years ago, there's people that got beaten up, but it does seem to be the exception to the norm. You're not hearing a lot of stories about that now. And
one thing I'll say, the early 90s,
hear things pretty fast.
I mean, the early 90s, it also didn't feel like it was the same focus. Like you wouldn't walk outside of the campus club and see tanks and balloons.
Right.
Like people would go there, they'd drink some beers, they'd find a place to smoke some pot. A few people would probably take some acid because this was 91, 92, and people just did that more regularly at random things. But in the late 90s, it felt like it was becoming a bit more of a crowd focus, and it was getting a little... As someone who goes to shows sober, even back then, it did feel a little bit weird. And a couple of the jams lose me because I feel like I don't have an entry point as a sober fan. Like the Wolfman's Brother of 98, Halloween 98. It's a great example, one where I was lost. I'm like, can you give me some melody, please? So I definitely prefer the sober Trey.
Well, I mean, if memory serves right, and I don't have notes in front of me, but Trey walked off the stage in the middle of that
Yes.
set, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Ghost, like 6 minutes in the Ghost, he's like, okay, I'm done.
You know, that's real foreshadowing for the hiatus and the breakup, and then, you know, Whitehall, 10 years later. That's something was not 100% right with the band at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think the weirdest
we
thing
tend to
about
look at we tend to overlook things, you know, for the, you know, the great highlights, but then there are those moments where if you sit there and you analyze Phish history, you can see, well, all right, well, that happened that night, or that happened that night. Little breadcrumbs.
Yeah, the weirdest thing about Halloween '98 is that it's a 2-song encore, which I in my mind, Trey walks off stage at Ghost, and that's the end of the show. But they actually did come out and do an encore, and actually did 2 songs, which is just kind of like, did he sober up enough? I mean, did whatever was freaking him out stop? I don't know if I want to know, but I've always been curious as to what exactly happened that night.
One of the great mysteries. So, you know, leading into this, obviously they break up in 2004 after Coventry. And then, you know, we have 4.5 years pretty much just over with no Phish. And so, you know, if you guys want to at least share a little bit about how you felt during that period. Obviously, you see the rise of some other bands, but just, you know, having no Phish for that period, what the scene was like, if there was, you know, an online scene, or, you know, people still talking about older shows. Obviously there was. And then, you know, when Hampton was announced in the fall of 2008, you know, what the response was there.
So I think Phish, the community definitely was still there with the Fantasy Tour. For me, I got involved in trading shows digitally, getting everything into circulation at that point. You know, where it was tapes in the 90s and early 2000s, and you started seeing MP3s, and then by 06, 07, 08, everything was pretty much online. And I got involved with Mockingbird, and at the end of the breakup, where I sent a couple of, well, actually several corrections to Ellis and Charlie, and got involved there. So Phish, the community was definitely still there, but you had other bands that people were paying attention to. You know, there was Grab, Gordon, Russo, Astasio, Benevento. So that was happening in 2006. You had a chance to see other jam bands, you know, like Humphreys and Disco Biscuits, you know, getting a chance to shine a little bit more without the band like Phish, you know, somehow blocking them a little bit.
Those were my Tea Leaf Green and Perpetual Groove years. That's also where Jam Cruise really got its start, was during that period. And Charlie, correct me here, but didn't we issue the first Phish companion right before the 1.0 ended, and the second one right as 2.0 was ending?
Yeah.
Did we break them up?
Yes. Yes. Hilariously.
It's good timing.
Yes. One might say that, I guess. But
Well, the third one made it.
yeah, the third one was excellent, obviously, too. David, did you want to say anything about the breakup period other than what you've just said?
Just I spent Melissa, my wife, who I started dating in 2.0, and then we kept on. We're now obviously still together. One thing we did was we did a alternating years. Like one year we travel for nature and hikes, and one year we travel for music. And yeah, the jam cruise scene, or the jam band scene, was definitely more smaller bands, but a lot of them. And there was enough. There was enough to keep me going.
There was plenty.
Yeah.
I think you
There's
still
plenty of
have
music to see.
plenty of those smaller bands that never changed. If not, there are even more bands at this point, which is great.
And there's enough that there's something for everyone. Like Phish, the one thing about Phish is that they have 12 different styles. So the reason why I don't think there ever will be a next thing is because some people like the funk jams, and some people like the improvisation, the more melodic, and some people like the compositions, and some people like from the shorter, poppier songs. And a lot of the bands centered around each one of those is what has happened since. So there always was, like for me, it was like Tea Leaf Green I liked a lot. And for other people, it was Humphreys. And there are enough different bands that not one band got everyone, but everyone seemed to have something.
Got it. And then so moving to the announcement of the reunion, and obviously there was the Rothbury Festival in 2008. When was it? When Trey and Mike played together. And Trey debuted Numberline. But what was that like? Obviously there were rumors before the official announcement, but the feeling in the scene when they were like, "We're coming back."
The good news is, oh my God, Phish are coming back. The bad news is, Hampton, 13,000 tickets? Really? That was definitely one of the, if not the hardest ticket in Phish history. It's top 5. And that was kind of a little bit, but everyone was just excited so much.
I recall, thanks to attendance bias, which I saw Brian in the chat, there'll be something about this on attendance bias in the next few months. But like in the rumors actually started in like the third quarter of 2007 when Trey was sober, and so Mockingbird, we actually started a Phish reunion fund in September 2007, and it was wishful thinking, obviously. But we actually, I saw Ellis in the chat, but we actually strongly believed, in light of Trey's sobriety and the fact that the band were talking again, and talking well. We thought for sure Phish was going to be back, and so we started this Phish reunion fund. And so by mid 2008, it was just from our point of view, it's just a matter of when's the damn announcement going to come out, because we were really confident there were going to be shows. I think we actually were hoping they would be in the the fourth quarter of 2008, like some MSGs for New Year's, that kind of thing. But obviously we
want to comment on this one, Charlie? This comment from Ellis, but with some dark fine print of what we do with the money if Trey died.
Oh, that's a good one. Thanks for that, Ellis. I'd completely forgotten about that, obviously. Yeah, but that does speak to the darkness of that time. I mean, Trey had some very serious problems, and his sobriety was just this incredible event, for the community, and it gave us all a lot of hope for the future. And I think we should just move on now and stop dwelling on that period.
Good plan.
The announcement was amazing. The announcement was October 1st or something, 2008. And
yes, it was October 1st. Melissa's birthday present.
So exciting, right?
That was after Brad Sands' wedding, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So at that point,
and Trey's birthday,
before them, we're playing on a stage together, or really in a dance hall or wedding venue, I guess I should say. The four of them are up there playing together. Then it wasn't really crazy to think, well, maybe they're going to be playing as a full band again, doing shows.
It was a top 5 day for the community, definitely, just in terms of how excited everyone. I remember PT Fantasy Tour. For those who don't know, PT is the Phish message board. About 3 days before the announcement, changed their logo from a crystal ball with a PT in it to the Hampton Coliseum. And people are like, "Do you really know something? Or are you just feeding the rumor?" And from that moment on, that was basically what everyone was doing. They were sitting on message boards and waiting.
The prophecy.
And
prophecy.
I just say
Phish is back. Phish is back.
I was incredibly sick the day of Ticketmaster on sale, and I somehow pulled a pair of 3-day passes. And that's my best Ticketmaster score ever.
Impressive. Amazing. Well, obviously Phish comes back in 2009, but it kind of takes a few years for them to be like back in, musically. And so do you guys want to talk a little bit about, I guess, 2009 through 2013 or so, leading up to really the like Dick's 2012, Tahoe Tweezer, when things start blossoming into new realms, kind of how you were feeling based on the music, once the novelty of Phish being back, wears off, they're touring consistently. Obviously in the year 2010, there are 0 jams over 20 minutes long. The only song that hit 20 minutes was Yem. So, kind of, curious what your guys' thoughts were at that time about the music.
So 2009 had moments where they were really back at the Gorge with the Sneak and Sally and the Bathtub Gin, and Albany with the Seven Below and Ghost. And I know that I'm a big proponent of 20-minute jams online, but just because a song doesn't reach 20 minutes doesn't mean that it's not a great version. They just, in 2010, they didn't decide to go out as deep as they had. I just totally cut David off as I started talking. So David, please.
Well, now I'm coughing. Give me a second. All I was going to say is my theory about that time is that they got so far, excuse me, I'm sorry, into the improvisation, and they're so it's kind of that 97 through 2004 time was focused so much on the improvisation, but also the darkness, that my thought is that they felt like they're rebooting to their last safe space. Like you're playing a video game and you go down the wrong turn and you go, well, I saved it like 8 turns ago. Maybe I go back there and try playing again. And I felt like they're trying to reboot themselves back to like 93. And then let's focus a bit more on the songs, let's get back to where we were, and then let's see where we can go again with the improvisation.
There's definitely a comfort zone from 2009 for sure, in 2010. And more often than not, as the years progressed after that, they were not necessarily in that comfort zone, and were exploring musically quite a bit.
2011, you have first that insane jam in the Storage Jam, where at the festival, I had a friend. She said, "Are they playing a 4-set?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's over by the storage unit in the center area." And she walked by there and she texted me like, "Wait, are you sure this is Phish?" What they're doing, which is so far out there.
Yeah.
And that continued again through the Gorge that fall or that summer, or like a week and a half later, a couple of weeks later, where they did this rock and roll jam, the song, not the style, where Paige got in the theremin and it just got really far out there.
Playing some beat stick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great transition there.
Oh, so good.
So they weren't long per se, but they definitely were already starting to get weird by 2011. And there's really no other jam like that since then.
2010 was kind of like a reprise of 98 as well, as like another jukebox tour, if you will, where that summer they were debuting a different cover almost every night. So there was definitely some rehashing of concepts from 1.0 into this new era of Phish, and mixing in with their current playing style as well. Best of both worlds.
I do feel like that's part of what they're doing now, even like to this day, is that they say things that they spent the entire year focusing on is now like kind of like a tool. How Funk isn't the tour, the ambient is like 98, all the ambient stuff. Now it's more like, we can do this. We know how to do this now. But we also can do, they kind of switch back and forth between their eras sometimes within the show or even the jam.
So I'm curious what you guys think. Everybody kind of has their own perception of when that moment in those years where that Phish was truly back, whether it's Tahoe, Tweezer, Dick's 2012. I mentioned those already. But I'm curious, each of the three of you, what that moment is for you. Let's start with you, Scott.
I'm not sure where I would put that line in the sand. I think the Dick's runs brought setlist magic. The Tahoe Tweezer, is a landmark jam where they just went deeper than they had for the last 3 or 4 years. 2015 had so many highlights that summer. So I'd say at least by 2015, if not a lot sooner, depending on who you ask. You could ask 10 people and you're going to get 10 different responses.
Right. It's the beauty of Phish. David, what about you?
I have two very different answers.
Mm-hmm.
The first, 3609 Divided Sky, song number 2. Fluffhead has spent my entire time holding my breath. Like, are they going to pull this off or not? Or are they going to slop their way through it?
Yeah.
By Divided Sky, I'm like, okay, they're really back, and they're playing it well, and they're playing their compositions. This is amazing. But it also feels like a cop-out answer, because that's not really the question you're asking. The second answer I would probably give, as much as I love the Tahoe Tweezer, and as much as I loved the Fuck Your Face show, the 2016 Halloween run. That's where they really felt like they were real. Ever since then, really, I feel like from that starting that fall 2016 through now, as I feel like I've really been enjoying almost everything they've been doing ever since then. As much I listen to that as much as I listen to the 90s stuff these days.
I mean, also fall 2010 with the Augusta and Utica shows. Manchester in the middle of the week still kind of had that you snooze, you lose feel, where it was this show out, off the beaten path, well, in Manchester. And just they threw down from the get-go with the first After Midnight since Big Cypress, and some rarities in there. So there are definitely flashes of them being back, even as early as 2010, that tour.
What about you, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny hearing, going back to what was said earlier about, there being, you ask 5 people and you get 5 different, answers to that question when Phish was back. But for me, my answer is actually strikingly similar to David, but still different in that that Down with Disease on the third night of Hampton.
That's great.
Hampton had been played really, Hampton had been played really straight. Everything been played really straight, and by that Down with Disease jam, there was finally some like type 2, basically. It didn't really go off the deep end or anything, but it was still like, oh, okay, they can still do it. They can still bring it. And then for me, like unquestionably for me, I thought Phish was like really truly back when I heard the June 7th, 2009 Camden fucking Tweezer, because I was like, holy shit. This tweezer could have been performed in 93, 94, 95, it's, I think it's that good. And I mean, I've listened to it within the last month or two too. I mean, I just feel it's very repetitive, but it's just got a great jam though. And at least in my opinion, and for me, when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is going to be an exciting new era, of Phish. And I was really, really probably too optimistic, given how that tour ultimately went. But that June 7th, 2009 set, you've got this fantastic Sand and fantastic Tweezer, and the Tweezer actually closes that set. I mean, that when I heard that thing, which probably the next morning, because we could do that back then, I think we could listen to the shows right away still back then. Anyway, that's it for me. June 7th, 2009.
Amazing. And so, through the modern era, you each have your different moment of when they're back. But what's, I guess if each of you want to put forth a highlight or two from the 3.0, 4.0 era that are like significant moments to you, either musically or in terms of the scene, you see big developments for the band. Let's go in reverse order this time. Let's throw it back to you, Charlie. You're muted again.
I said I'm going to need the question again because I was reading the chat.
That works. A couple of moments from the modern era, whether it's musically, in terms of band development, in the fan base, whatever, just a couple of significant moments that really impacted you.
I mean, honestly, the most recent one was the Wolfman's Brother at MSG, right? I thought that's just out of nowhere. I thought we got the hose. I thought the hose was brought for real then. I mean, that was just such a shock. And so when I heard that, because I wasn't at that show, when I heard that on the recording the morning after, I guess, I just flipped out because I was like, where the F did that come from? So that's just without giving your question much thought, I could probably come up with something smarter to say if I listened to David and Scott. But that's my answer, at least right now. Just
Throw it
that
back to you after David and Scott go, if you come up with another one. But David, let's go to you next.
Okay, a couple I can come up with the top of my head. First, Casbah Vax, because that was just the Phish. I feel like they have three pillars of what makes them great, and one of them is the silliness, and that was just a complete dive into that realm, especially when they, to the degree that they pulled that thing off in terms of getting music magazines to post reviews of the album, and having some of the songs appear in playlists at radio stations from like a decade earlier. So that's one. The 12:30 2019 tweezer around the 20-minute mark, where they start doing this ambient post-rock style thing where they don't really play that style very often.
Mhm.
And it's just stunning and beautiful. And I still listen to that thing all the time. Can I think of a third one off the top of my head? The year before, also, the 2018 show, the 12:30 2018, with let's not getting these backwards, because at this point I've seen so many of these that they kind of merge in my head a bit. But I believe that was when Glide 2 came back for the one
Yes.
time, and we had just lost a cat, and for whatever reason that night, it was my wife's favorite cat, and it just really let her deal with that. So it's a show I think of a lot just for that reason, that we still all have these personal connections with the show. The band isn't intending these things, but sometimes what they do hits us in ways that they have no idea, but are so important to us at the time. So that show comes home for that reason. That was an important show personally.
Amazing. Scott, how about you?
The first thing I think of with 3.0 is Baker's Dozen. For me, that's up there for pinnacles of Phish in the last 40 years. Arenas, Big Cypress. Big Cypress is another one of those things where, again, you're playing for 7 hours, which again is pretty much unheard of to have that happen at a show. But to have 13 shows, 237 songs, no repeats. Talking mainstream, there's video of Metallica talking about the Baker's Dozen later on. They can't believe that a band did that. The Halloween sets, where it was such a tradition to have them doing a costume set of another band's music. 2013 Wingsuit was the first, which kind of you dipped your toes in the water musically, where can we pull this off? Yeah, we can do this. And then 2014 really took the ball and ran with it with Chilling Thrilling Sounds of Hard House, where the visuals with the costumes and the stage setup is another peak Phish experience for me in my 26 years of seeing the band. And as David said, Cosvod Voxed was, still they could pull gags off, 12/31/02 with Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And then Cosvod Vox, they still had a way to pull this off. And I think some things work better than others. The Sci-Fi Soldier is a bit controversial with some fans. Some people liked it more than others, but again, it takes a lot of balls to do what they do. Where you're pulling out like 10, 12 songs and playing them for the first time at one show. It doesn't happen too often in the music industry. And to have the costumes, and in that case there was no Phish Bill as a comic book. It's very special, very unique that we're still getting these things all these years later. They're still doing Halloween shows, and they're still doing Phish Bills or comic books. It's very special. I'm not sure what I would really put for a definitive show of 3.0 or 4.0. As recently as fall 2021, for me, that's one of the best tours they've had in any era. where I only did the 4 Vegas shows leading up to that, or at the end of it rather, but just each night, what are they going to do tonight? And then you're looking at the set list the next morning if you're on the East Coast, and you're just like, oh my God, they did that, or they brought this song back, or they, like right at the start of the tour, they played And So to Bed for the first time ever. And End of Session at the Baker's Dozen. And so it's definitely happened at times where you're still having these wow moments.
Amazing. Charlie, do you have anything else now that you've had a minute?
No, not really. Just to say that that we have a lot to look forward to. I think that's kind of the most exciting thing. Perhaps is that, if you had asked me 15 years ago if Phish would still be playing at this point in time, I'm pretty sure I would have been pretty doubtful and skeptical of that. But I mean, look at all that's happening with the Sphere and the Delaware Festival, and I mean it's just an exciting time. And I mean, when I think about the best things, I guess, over the last 15 years, I mean, other than what David and Scott have already said, because obviously the Halloween shows have been spectacular, and there's been several excellent festivals. The scene at Indio, for example, was magical, frankly. Tweezer has just been transcendent most of the time, which is incredible. And again, Trey being sober is just such a fucking gem. It's an amazing thing, and just gives me a lot of hope for the future. So
amazing.
With the band being 40 today, I just want to add one last thing.
Yeah.
I look at bands that I've loved throughout my life, and I don't want to compare one to another, but Pink Floyd, Zeppelin, the Beatles, Grateful Dead, they didn't make it to 40 years, and to have a band still around, and I'm not saying that Phish is either better or worse or on the same level as those other bands, but they're just bands that to me are so important in my upbringing and music that I listen to so often, and to still be playing at 40 years, and you have the hiatus, you have the breakup, and to still be releasing music and not being a nostalgia act where you're playing stuff from 20 years ago as your most recent album. And to have the new songs that quickly evolve, like Oblivion from this past year, which already has gone over 20 minutes, and you have new songs that are new jam vehicles that are breathing life into the music. And it's really a magical experience. And we're so fortunate and blessed to have the band happy and healthy and playing new music and wanting to take risks. U2, Phish, those are the 2 bands playing at Sphere in Vegas so far. And just it blows my mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. Very well said. David, anything else to add before we wrap up here?
Actually, I have one thing that, like what Scott mentioned. At one point, I asked, "Are there other bands who have been playing this long with the same lineup?"
Yeah,
and people pointed out ZZ Top, who played for even longer.
They might be giants.
They might be giants. Well, there's only other 2 of them though. So, and they've I don't know if they count though. They have people cycle through. They have
a backing band for them, so I'm not sure that's really a fair comparison.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the band to dance.
So I'm saying they're not the only one, but the fact that they're doing this, and they're, again, like Scott said, still writing new songs, and not all of them are love, but I mean, they're still writing songs like Mercury. Like, what band that late in their career write something like that?
So the lineup isn't exactly the same, though, when you think about Jeff being there in the beginning and not Page. So there has been a slight change. But for the most part, for 39 years or whatever.
32 years.
38 years with Page being there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I know there's the whole Jack at the very, very, very beginning, but when it's 1985,
32 years of Phish, guys.
And you also want to throw in the Giant Country Horns while you're at it, for that one tour. But
right.
for the most part, I mean, we're not quite at 40 years for this lineup, but we're very close to it. And
Right.
they're still playing, they're still improvising in ways that so few bands do, where they still have these communications, where if you listen to a jam and you fast forward 4 minutes down to say, I'm going to stop and skip ahead, every member will be doing something different when you get 4 minutes down the road. They don't, so many bands these days, there's a lot of static and one person soloing on top. And they do it sometimes, because everyone does that sometimes, but I'm just amazed at how much they still have new ideas, and they still can constantly talk to each other and change what's going on, all four of them as equals. And it's why I'm still here some 400 odd shows later and still doing this.
Amazing. That's an incredible conclusion there. So thank you guys. Mike, do you want to wrap it up from here?
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, David. Thanks, Scott. Thank you, Charlie. This was great. Again, this is just the Mockingbird Foundation celebrating 40 years of Phish. Would encourage you to check out mbird.org and see what we're all about. And if you're up for it, give us a donation. And thank everyone for your time.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.